Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Gilles Stockton. He is a cattle and sheep rancher located near Grass Range, Montana. Can you give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself and your involvement in the cattle industry?
I graduated from Montana State University in Bozeman in a master's in animal science, 1975, and in that same year, I took over the family ranch here in Grass Range. I grew up here in Grass Range. It was a mixed cattle and sheep place. So 75 to now is how many years? That's a lot of years. But in between, after I graduated from with my bachelor's degree in 68, I had joined the Peace Corps and was sent to Somalia in East Africa. And that sort of opened up my mind to the possibilities of there, and that's one of the reasons I got the master's degree. So I did a parallel career as running the ranch, but then doing short-term assignments in consulting on mostly livestock marketing issues in Africa and the Middle East. I did that all the way along.
You mentioned livestock marketing issues. What in the Middle East and Africa, what were those issues?
There's actually a very large trade of livestock between the East Africa, the countries of East Africa, the Horn of Africa, and the Middle East. And most of that trade is in the terms of live animals. So there's very, very complicated kind of trade of how do you get live animals in that climate across the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, into the Arabian Peninsula, alive. And then you had the complicating factor of that Somalia as a country collapsed in 1992. So most of these animals come from Somalia to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But how do you export a live animal from a country that doesn't have a government? You know, the international rules require that there be, some kind of valid veterinary certification that says that these animals are disease-free. Saudi Arabia wanted the animals. Somalia wanted to sell the animals, but you had this sort of international veterinary agreement that said that somehow they had to be certified to be disease-free. That's kind of the issues that I dealt with and still deal with, in the sense that a friend that I made through the years, who actually was for a period of time was recently the Prime Minister of Somalia, called me about how to be able to set up an electronic market, a video auction kind of market, to make the market transactions less complicated, less expensive.
What do you feel are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets?
It's our ag organizations. That's the main problem. They're like a team of dog sled dogs that all run off in the opposite directions. That's the problem. I mean, the solution is evident, just to do what they did in 1921. But each one of these groups I guess they've got to be their own hero. And the result is that nobody's a hero and nothing gets done.
What do you feel would be I guess an obvious solution would be for them to come together. Do you think these organizations could ever come together and get on the same page?
Egos, that's the problem. Personal egos. I think when you poll their members, I think you'll find enormous agreement. It's egos at the top. That's the problem.
There have been multiple proposals brought forward to increase competition in our fed cattle markets. What do you think would be the best way to increase competition?
Well, it was first advanced by the Western Organization of Resource Councils in 1996, and they made a petition to the Secretary Glickman at that time that the Packers and Stockyards Act clearly allows the Secretary of Agriculture to require that the packers have to bid for the cattle in public competitive market. It's just very much that simple. And when you think about it, what they did 100 years ago in 1921 was just that. The consent decree did two things. The packers of that time could no longer control the transport of the animals. I guess they owned all of the cattle cars. So like here in Montana, people would put cattle on the cattle cars and send them to Chicago, and then they would be priced in Chicago at the terminal market that was owned by Armour or Cudahy or whatever the company was that owned the cars and owned the terminal market. So what the packers of today have done is eliminated the public market. So essentially what they have done is created their own proprietary market. We don't think of it as a market because it's not publicly accessed, but it is a market because it prices fat cattle. And mostly it prices fat cattle by saying, well, we're just going to pay you whatever the spot market is on the day that we kill them or the week that we kill them. And then that spot market sometimes only prices no cattle or next to no cattle. So the spot market is open to manipulation, and that prices all the rest of the cattle.
How do we address this situation with the packers?
Well, we just got to have the guts to go into another consent decree like they did in 1921 and say that they just have to buy their cattle in a public competition. The captive supplies, what it means, the captive supplies, for the most part in cattle, is not so much the cattle that they actually own, the packers I mean, but the cattle that they control through unpriced contracts. In a sense, it's even worse than what chicken producers are doing. Chicken producers at least have a contract. These feedlots don't even have a contract. They just send their cattle and say, well, give us whatever you think the market is. It needs to be priced. It doesn't need to be priced as in an auction market, but there needs to be a base at the time of an actual contract being entered into, and it can be a grid, right? So whatever it is, the base price is $1.25 per pound, plus or minus whatever the grid says at the time that they're graded. But at least then we know that the market is $1.25.
If our industry doesn't tackle this issue and we continue to see the packers do this, what do you think will happen to our industry? Do you think we will become vertically integrated like the chicken and hog industries?
Well, we are vertically integrated. There was a huge loss of independent feeders in just the last 5 years, right? So all you got, is a few, very large feeding concerns, have some unknown agreement with the packing. And look at this case that's going on now in the state of Washington about, 200,000 cows?
Yeah, with Easter Day Farms in Tyson.
Right. What's going on there? There was 200,000 cows and nobody knows if they existed or not? There was some kind of agreement, verbal agreement between them and Tyson. Yep. There's something going on there that blew up. It was some kind of internal agreement that, say, somebody who was feeding out 20,000 or 50,000 head of cattle didn't have the same access. And that's the whole point of the deal, is access. Really know what these big feedlots are actually getting. We presume we know, but we don't really know because none of that is publicly reported.
So you talk about the industry already being vertically integrated. Do you think we're seeing vertical integration in the cow-calf sector already?
We don't think we do, but we're in the worst position of all because we have no guarantees. We have no contracts with anybody. And our vertical integration is showing up in small ways, like this push for electronic IDs. Who benefits from that?
The packers.
Yeah, the packers, the exporters, right? Yeah. The push for certain bloodlines of sires. We're being herded into a funnel. It looks like, I think we have the illusion that we're independent, but little by little we're losing our independence. And then what is our price for feeder calves based on? Basically, it's based on the cutout value of the fat cattle, and then it's all calculated backwards. One of these huge feedlots concerns is willing to pay us. Back when I started in 75, that we had thousands and thousands of farmer feeders in the Midwest. They were raising corn, and they were deciding, well, corn prices seem to be kind of weak, so let's buy some feeder calves, right? Well, they're all gone. It's all gone. We're captive suppliers to a system which we have no control over, no ability to affect in any way.
So a minute ago you mentioned EID, electronic identification, that the USDA is pushing. How do you think that will affect our industry if that does get pushed onto us, mandated?
There's two reasons being presented for why it needs to be done. And one of them they don't talk about much, but they keep talking about it as promote exports. I have neighbors that are, selling some pretty fantastic cattle and getting a premium for putting some source ID on them. And they're getting this premium for doing that in going into this branded program that I guess exports some of those steers eventually. Well, this push then will remove that premium. If we're required to do that for all of the cattle, then why does these neighbors deserve 4 or 5 cents more anymore? They won't be able to get that anymore. The other side of the argument for this is for disease control and to respond. They keep coming back to foot and mouth disease. That if we don't have this and we get foot and mouth disease, then there's going to be a disaster in the country. Well, there will be a disaster in the country, but why are we going to be importing foot and mouth disease? Well, we're going to import foot and mouth disease because we're importing meat from countries that have foot and mouth disease. So how is putting electronic ID helping us from preventing having foot and mouth disease? It's not. It's just adding a burden on producers.
And you bring up foot and mouth disease. A few weeks ago, Namibia came forward and said they had another confirmed case of foot and mouth disease. This is the third confirmed case that they've had in the past 4.5 months, and we continue to import product from Namibia. Why do we do that? Why do we put our cattle industry in danger when we could cut off those imports, but we don't?
Well, who's in charge? Who is ag policy and import policy there to benefit? Who needs beef from Namibia? It's not the kind of beef that we traditionally eat in this country. And there's no need for Namibia to be exporting beef to us because the beef market internally to Africa is higher for that quality of beef than it is in the United States. And this is something that I know from my work that I've been doing in livestock marketing. They can get more money sending that beef to Nigeria. The trouble is that in Nigeria they don't have dollars. So they want that dollar, so they want to send it to the United States to get that dollar. But the meat is needed in Africa.
So more than ever, consumers want to know where their food comes from. Do you think there's a place for MCOOL within our cattle industry?
Absolutely. It just blows my mind that any congressman, or in this case, there are different groups in Montana are pushing a cool bill for Montana. Why any legislator in a state where cattle is the most important industry, the largest industry, would vote against country of origin labeling? Where are these people? Who do they think they're representing? It's mind blowing. I think there's a tendency for cattle producers to overemphasize the usefulness of cool. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but it's a step in the right direction. I think you can look at it, like if you're building a bridge out of stone or an archway out of stone, right? So you've got all these stones that have got to go in the right shape. They got to be right shaped, and they got to be placed in this archway, right? And the most important stone is the keystone. Once you put the keystone in place, that entire arch is very stable. That keystone is to restore market competition to the fat cattle market. Until you've done that, you haven't really solved anything. But the other stones are important, and cool is one of the most important stones in that archway.
A significant portion of cattle country is dealing with drought. Have these conditions impacted your operation?
This was a pretty average summer, and this winter so far is not very encouraging. And towards the end of the summer, we were having some real grasshoppers in places, and to where I live, they just sort of got here in August. Other places in Montana, they were there quite a bit earlier. If we don't have a wet spring to knock those grasshoppers back, we're in trouble. On your overall question, I guess what I was kind of looking at some statistics today is that overall cattle numbers are trending down, and part of the reason that they're trending down is because of drought in quite a number of states. I don't know how real significant it is, but I find it kind of phony. I don't think that this year's or last year's cattle number were that high to justify the low prices that we got, Nonetheless, if cattle numbers are trending down, maybe cattle prices will trend up some, and I know that people around here could really use a boost.
So with that being said, do you think since the cattle numbers are trending downwards that we will finally see a good year? Do you have an outlook for the cattle market going forward this year?
God, I've been in this business almost 50 years. I don't even judge. My philosophy in the end came that when it's time to sell, just close your eyes, load the trailers, get them to the market, because you can't outguess it.
How do you think President Joe Biden's administration will affect the cattle industry?
It's hard to say. We're going to have Tom Vilsack as the Secretary of Ag again. He started his first round of being Secretary of Ag there under the Obama administration with a series of field hearings all over the nation talking about market stuff. And producers all across the nation really responded. They flocked to those hearings. I personally was on a panel down in Denver when the hearing in the Western, right? And everybody says, you've got to do something about these cattle markets. He didn't. Mm-hmm. They wimped out. They had the hearings, and they wimped out. They started on these GIPSA rules, and they had an administrator, Dudley Butler, who was a really, really strong guy, came out of the Organization of Competitive Markets to push for the GIPSA rules. And they had a good, strong set of GIPSA rules. Pretty soon, the rules were cut in half, and kind of on the last day of the Obama administration, Vilsack put the GIPSA rules in place. And on the first day of the Trump administration, the GIPSA rules were revoked. And we certainly got zip out of the Sonny Perdue, about anything to do anything good about markets in any of the livestock, right? So it's discouraging. And again, it comes back to what your first question. Well, we're not going to get anything done if our ag organizations are going to continue to act as infantile as they have been acting.
Do you have any thoughts on Biden's approach to climate change, such as him stopping the Keystone XL pipeline?
Not really. My concern about the pipeline, my personal concern, it's not an organizational concern or anything like that. My personal concern was issues about private property. It just really bothered me that a foreign corporation would be given the right to condemn property in the United States.